Yeah, so today we're going to just start a brand new file, create a world if I can click this, and we're going to take a terrain that we make right here into Blender. And there's a few things that we can do in Blender, or a few ways we can export this to Blender and how we could use it within Blender to kind of optimize workflows a little bit. Because I know there's a few variations of how we go about sort of masking this terrain's materials into Blender. And there's some pretty cool ways to kind of really easily do that, and a couple ways that I'm just kind of fumbling my head on why isn't this a little easier with the shader in Blender. So yeah, welcome. Good to see you, Traveling Pie. Thanks for following earlier on this morning from Deadly Shoutout. Brawny Bear, hi. Thank you for the first time chat. Oh, a fellow Tyler. Oh, you're a Tyler too. We Tylers have to stick with each other. Hey, Richard. I really got to figure out how to pronounce your name. But yeah, thanks for coming back. Glad to see you on another evening. So finally, you get to witness us take this to Blender. I've been talking about taking it to Blender for quite a while, but we're finally doing it. No problem. Happy to be here and check out the stream. Yeah, it's quite a bit different from playing a video game like Escape from Tarkov, which I totally should try doing that sometime on here. But who knows? We may play some games on a Friday night or Thursday night if things work out the way we intend. Well, as long as scheduling works out, we should be okay. All right, I'm just going to run through a few things here to try and maybe create something that's a little appeasing. So let me see, what do I want to do? Let's do wide flows to kind of rough that up a bit. And then I want to, now that I can't remember exactly what I want to do now. Let's see. Let's inflate the top, but let's add a distribution so that it's inflating just the top area here, because I'm going to add some rock detail. Oh, apparently I didn't let it load fast enough. There we go. All right, so what that did was we added this sort of rocky cap here, but I'm also going to add a slope, and we'll make sure that it adheres just to these small slope bits. Let's see, let's increase this a smidge. Maybe feather that out some. There we go. We're just adding a bit of a rocky cap by using that inflate effect. All right, next, let's see, what did I want to do? Let's try rocky hard, maybe sharp. Plateaus. I'm just filtering through these to see kind of what I want to do. And rocky actually looks pretty cool. There we go. So erosion, rocky. And then let's add, this is going to be pretty cool. We're going to use a curve. We're going to use this curve and change the source range to be something a little high so that well, maybe that's a little too high. Something like that. We'll change this. But so destination range, let's bump up this bottom a little bit. Ooh, hold on a minute. Let's bump up this bottom. And then we will do this. There we go. And let's see. Nah, I don't want that. All right, so that's not bad. So now that we've done the curve, we need to go back and probably change our inflate. Yeah, because our height got adjusted too much. And I'm just keeping on. Okay, there we go. So now we've added this sort of rocky cap right here. And lastly, to kind of fill this off a little bit, let's add mud. But the mud, we're gonna lower it to the bottom height. Sorry if I'm going a little quick. I'm just trying to get ourselves over to Blender a little quicker. Let's see, let's make it pretty low. Oh, that's too much. That bottom area is pretty, all right. A little bit more, feather that up. Okay, so we've added a mud filter to sort of this bottom area. So you kind of can see what it's doing. It's basically adding some sedimentation. So now we've got ourselves a neat little canyony ridge here just by adding a few filters. Okay, this is like a drug for my ADHD brain. A lot of things are happening. I am aware of that. So it's pretty fun. We could, let's see. I like that seed, but we could change this to many more things. Do you need a juicy PC to run this? Not necessarily. It just depends. I'm running a 3090 Ti, and this terrain is 4K. It's a 4K terrain, and I'm hovering around 90. You can see right here 90 to 100 FPS, but I'm only using just a smidge over a gig. And so this is a version of World Creator that is still pretty optimized, but the next version, I think coming out maybe by the end of this month or by the end of the next month. I'm not quite sure what the log says, the timeline, but it will be heavily more optimized is what I am hoping for. But before this, I had a 2080 Ti, and I was able to still run this fairly well with about the same sort of FPS. It may be about 10 or 12 less FPS with a 2080 Ti. So it's fairly well optimized, but I'm not using anything heavy right now. And my resolution is just 4K. If I went to 8K, this is an 8K resolution, as you can see the generator is working. So 8K resolution, you can see it's hovering around 57 frames per second. So 8K is pretty hefty, but you also have to realize it's doing some hefty things like these erosion filters. And particularly this sediment filter here is doing some heavy lifting. Now you could change the precision level back to 1. And you see now I'm hovering around 140 frames per second. And when you go to export, you could change this precision back down to something a little sharper just for export purposes. There's no way Twitch is doing this justice. Oh, heck no. Right now I am streaming this at 1080, 30 frames per second, but I do record this on the side at 4K 60 frames per second, and I host those on my YouTube channels if you want to see the 4K variant. It is way prettier on the 4K version, but the 4K version of this particular stream won't come out for 2 weeks because I give a week for my Patreon users to watch the unedited or the uncompressed version of this stream. So yeah, if you want to see it early, support the Patreon, or you could just rewatch this right after I get done streaming, but it'll just be 1080p, 30 frames. I feel like I need to buy a whole new monitor just to look at these YouTube videos. Yeah, I'm a bit sort of spoiled because I have a 32-inch 4K monitor, and it's only 60 hertz, but what I do, I really don't care so much about anything higher, and if I want to go higher, it's not that bad. Yeah, check out your YouTube. Yeah, let me do some linkage here. I am just typing. I think that's the right link. Me too. I have a 4K 32-inch 60 hertz LG. Oh, nice. I feel like once you go 32 inches at 4K, it's really hard to go any smaller. Like I am spoiled with 32 inches. I did have a YouTube. I did have some commands, but I definitely need to go back and add some. But anyway, if I were to go to add filter here and go under simulation and do sand, that's going to be really heavy to add, even from my computer. Or hydraulic is not bad. Let's see, sedimentation. Sedimentation usually is a little bit heftier to run, especially when you soften up this terrain this much. The talus is pretty fun. This is one of my favorite filters. But yeah, I'm going to continue on. So we're going to stick with this terrain. Now I'm just going to add a few textures real quick, but I'm not going to worry about adding the actual texture. I'm just adding colors so that I can then create a mask to be used in Blender to add other materials to. It'll make sense, especially if you're a follower of the World Creator Discord and you're wondering how to use Splatmaps in Blender or color maps. This is sort of the way we're going to do it. So we're going to just change this bottom texture here to something a little brownish. This one's going to be gray, and I'm not going to do anything complicated. I'm just going to add textures just so that we can get, here we go, we can get the point across. Right. I'm going to turn on my heat map so I can see what I'm doing here. So I want the slope, the big slope, to kind of be what's textured for this one. All right, we're going to do somewhat of a green color. We're going to make it height. For the lower distribution areas, let's do it up about, feather it up about right there. You can see the green is painting up to the side of this ridge or this hillside. And we'll also do, let's do, slope is nice. Let's see what rocks out. Actually, we'll do rocks the last one. Let's just go ahead and just do it as another slope because slope is reliable. Let's see. Let's not make it fully. Something like that. It's not pretty. Actually, let's rough up that edge a little bit. How about some noise? Wait, wrong one. Where am I at? Noise offset. That's what I want. Let's add a little bit of noise right here. You see this? It's a little smooth or a little straight. Noise offset just bumps that out a little bit. So it's just a little bit less. So it's just a little bit less. All right, last one we're going to do is, let's say it's something, how about like a dirty red sand color, but we'll just do this one completely as flow. And I can't see it. So we will increase the iterations. There we go. Let's see. Evaporation should remove some of it. Right, we don't want that. Range strength. There we go. All right, we will let it evaporate some water just a little bit. Maybe that's too much, just a smidge. All right, let's see what this looks like. There we go. So it's just kind of like this dirty color here. Is it possible to put snow caps? Yep. And I actually have a... Oh, I can't do it yet. Hold on. Let me go to some place that already has me talking completely about snow. All right, here's my channel. And here we go. See right here, snow. There's a 7 days ago, I posted all about talking about snow. So we could totally do snow. And so it's just a combination of, you know, different, if I can get it to show. There we go. Starting to add a little snow here. Snow caps. Getting there. So that's just one variation that we can go about doing it. But right here, I'm just going to keep it as is. And I don't want to overcomplicate this. Oh, definitely give it a watch. It's fun. Snow is probably one of my favorite things to deal with. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save this. Relative path, save, and we'll do this as test number 2. So I know I went through that really quick, but I kind of want to save some time for Blender. All right, test number 2. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through the process of exporting some of this, but we're going to export this based on a few variables. One, we're going to export this as a mesh along with a single color map, a single normal map, and single displacement map to kind of reflect what this looks like in Blender. The second way we're going to do this is we're going to export a height map or displacement map, which we're still going to do. And then we're going to then export each one of these individual colors as their own sort of mask or splat map in this case. And we're going to bring that into Blender and then use those splat maps or masks as a sort of factored texture in order to essentially mask out another texture over another. But there's a couple things we need to understand. So I want to go to the export tab right here and click add. It doesn't really matter. These are just sort of presets, but I'm just going to hit empty and then add, and we'll just do, let's go ahead and talk about these splat maps real quick. Let's see, I'm a hunter and going to school for fish and wildlife management. So seeing this type of environment makes my mind run wild with ideas. Yeah, the, what's that game? Call of the Wild, the hunting video game. That is really fun. And they got some amazing maps, some amazing terrains and landscapes. I think it's called Hunter Call of the Wild. Really good game. And you can scare the living daylights out of venison. All right. So a lot of people are probably wondering, how do you go about understanding the export panel here for a splat map? This, I believe, in the next update or sometime soon. Hopefully it's this year. This is some of this structure is kind of getting revamped a little bit. But at least for right now, it's pretty It's not so straightforward, but it is straightforward. So this preview layer here is going to show you what each texture layer looks like. So if I go to preview layer number 1, it's going to show you a texture layer. Preview number 2, it's going to show you another texture layer. 3, and we don't have a 4th one. So we just have, well, we have 4 textures. 0 counts as 1. So up to 3 on this preview layer is technically 4. If you remember that last color, this last color that we put on the terrain was this dirty sand or this flow map. That's what this one is. So if you think about it, if I'm going to my materials panel here, the first texture we added is the layer number 0, which is this layer. Texture number 2, which is this texture, and you can see this is what it looks like when I show the heat map. Okay, if I go back to the export preset and show that layer number 1, you see how these are exactly the same. Or layer number 2, which is this green layer here, click that, and you can see, wow, that's really fuzzy. You can see these are exactly the same. And once more, just to verify for you, that last material here is the heat map for it. And layer number 4, or layer number 3, which is texture number 4, you see that it is exactly the same. So in order to see this, that's going to basically be determined by this type factor here is layered. Layered is going to basically show you what the heat map is. So this heat map that we see on screen, it's going to show you the heat map as the splat map. If we go to blend and I go to this first preview layer, well, there's a big difference. All right, so let's go to this preview or this texture here. What's going on here? So we have the entire landscape is covered in red for this heat map, which makes sense. It's the bottom texture, so it's not applying anywhere other than everywhere. But this blend means that it is going to show us everywhere that this actual texture is being applied while reducing it or masking out the other layers. So if I were to go to layered view here, it's the same thing. But blend is going to actually show us where we see this texture with the other materials reduced from it or subtracted from it. Same thing with if I go to, all right, let's go to this one, for example. All right, so remember that the green color here is being applied, all across this sort of flat area. But this texture, this last texture has red areas that are subtracting or being placed on top of that. In the export panel here, you can see it's kind of right here. You can see some of that flow texture from that last material. It has been subtracted from this texture. So this blend type means it is, again, showing you everywhere that this particular texture or color is being being visually shown on the terrain, as opposed to layered means it's everywhere this texture is being distributed on the terrain. So it's a little different. When you say heat map, you're talking about temperature. No, it's just a phrase. I mean, I guess we can think about it as part of temperature. It's just a phrase on showing the sort of mask. So the mask of that particular texture or color or filter. So essentially the heat map could be whatever color, and I could change that right here. I can make this heat map whatever color I want. And sorry for the seizure there. So don't think of heat map as temperature. It's just more so showing you where that particular thing, whether it's a material or a filter, is being masked on the terrain. Yeah, it's no big, yeah. It's kind of like, think of a heat map as a stencil. You have a stencil, you spray the stencil, and you remove the stencil, and whatever the stencil cut out and let you apply, like letters and stuff, the result of that stencil is basically a heat map. All right, so now that we understand that particular export, we're going to do layered. I don't want to do blend for my exporting. We're just going to do layered. I'm going to select a folder. Let's go through the process and doing this off screen real quick. All right, we're going to go and select the test02 folder. Click OK. And when it doesn't matter which one of these preview layers you have selected. If you hit export selected, it's going to export a mask of each one of these textures, including the bottom one, which you're not really going to use. It's kind of pointless. But before we export this, we want to export this as a grayscale image or a black and white texture map. So we'll just use the single channel, and we can go ahead and click 16-bit. So it's just a little bit finer. You have if you have a few different formats here, but we're just going to stick to PNG because that's all we really need for Blender. It's no big deal. And you have a couple options for how you want to flip it, naming conventions, but we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to go ahead and keep what we want, and we're going to export selected. You'll see it running through, and it should have already done it. So let's go to this. And you see right here, it has exported our Splatmaps. So this one that you see on screen, this one right here is this Splatmap texture, even though it's really, I used too much noise there. But that one's pretty cool. All right, so we have our Splatmaps, and we could have named them whatever we wanted to, but that's okay. We're now going to go through and just export the remaining pieces that we want. Let's do a height map. We're going to choose an EXR format because it's 32-bit float, and everything on that's perfectly fine. Single channel as well. And I think everything else, auto normalization, yes, everything there is fine. And we'll just export selected as well. Now in the folder structure, we're not going to be able to see this one, this EXR, but Blender will be able to read it. If you want, you can export raw or Targa or TIFF or PNG. Those, if I'm exporting to Unreal Engine 5, I would stick with raw. I can't remember if EXR works. I think EXR does work, but I've typically just used raw. If you do use raw, make sure the bit depth is at least 16. The byte order is a little Indian. And channels, if you want to do a single channel, just change the channel from all to R, and it will just populate the red channel, which will technically just make it grayscale, I believe. But we like EXR for this case. And did I just export that? Yes, I exported that. Next, we want to export the normal map. I use RAW for Photoshop. Very interesting. Yes, I love RAW format for sure, especially with Photoshop. Normal map, PNG is fine. We could do 16-bit. I don't think it really matters too much, but we don't want it to be single channel. We want it to be fully colored. So let's go ahead and export this. This one takes a little bit more because it takes a little bit more intense nature for it to export, and I hope it does not crash. There we go. So it exported, and you see that normal map right here. So it's pretty detailed. So as in terms of resolution, because we had the precision at 1/4 meter, that means our export is 4K, and you can see right down here in the bottom right, 4096 by 4096. Now, when you export things like the normal map or the height map, it's good to make those the actual resolution of the terrain. However, I'm going to go ahead and add our mesh here. However, we want to make sure that when we export the mesh, we understand two different things. If we're exporting the mesh based on 4K, well, that's a really big file. Like a 4K mesh is pretty intense, and we don't really need the physical mesh to be that high, especially because it's going to make a really big file. So the only reason why I would use a physical mesh for exporting, because we could use the displacement map in Blender to get the mesh there at a really high resolution, and file size, we're just using the file size of a displacement map instead of the file size of a format, which I'm going to choose FBX, but you can choose OBJ and a number of others. But I'm going to choose FBX, and everything else should be fine. I'm going to click normalize. I don't care to include colors because I don't think it actually works right now. And I do not want to triangulate. I want it to be quads, just because quads are, in a lot of cases, better than triangles. So I'd rather just stick with that. So if you're going to have a landscape, and this includes the same process for Unreal Engine 5 or 4 as well, I wouldn't export a mesh at the same resolution as the terrain. I would do something smaller and then use the displacement map, or particularly the normal map, to increase that information elsewhere. So I'm going to go back to the biome tab here, and I'm going to change the precision up to 2 meters. And yes, this looks really janky. It looks pretty rough, and you can see it has made some really sharp edges here, but do not worry. If you're worried about exporting a mesh with these sharp edges, we're going to deal with that in Blender. But if you're not going to deal with that in Blender, like if you're going to bring that directly into something else like Unreal Engine, that's okay. What you can do is go to your filters, add filter, effects, and denoise. And you can denoise. See how it's reduced some of that? We can, let's see, change the radius to be really small. All right. And see how it's before and after here? So we've just denoised and removed some of those little jars, but I don't want to do that because I'm going to show you how you can do that in Blender. So what we can do, even though this particular mesh is based on 2 meters, which should be 512, yes. So it's 512 by 512. It looks pretty janky, but that's okay. We're just using the mesh, and then we're going to apply a normal map on top of this to add detail. Now, I'm going to go ahead and export this. One reason why you would do this is if you're going to be using the terrain as a vista or a background terrain. If you're using it at a background terrain, you can even go to 4 meters and just export this mesh and apply a high resolution. That's pretty janky looking. This one's much better. All right. You use a mesh if you want as a vista or a background terrain and apply a higher resolution normal map on top of that in order to apply detail. You can do the same thing for a close up, which is fine as long as the normal map is a very high resolution. In this case, we're going to go back to 1/4 meter because what I want to do now is export a color map. And the only reason why I am exporting a color map is so that I can use this color map to apply on top of the mesh as a vista. So we're just going to go ahead and export this. Let's say, and we probably won't use it, but we'll see. Okay, so we should have all of our pieces. We have the splat maps, we have the normal map, we have the displacement map, and that's really all I care about. We're going to do the mesh part first to showcase that. So I'm going to go to Blender here. Now we're in Blender. I think Blender, I can't remember what version. It's one of the later versions of Blender. I'm going to hit X and delete the cube. That's a very Blender thing to do. All right, and I'm going to change my view. So I'm going to press N to bring out this properties panel here. Select the view tab, and I'm changing my view distance from 1,000 meters to 10,000 meters so that I can see a bit further in the distance. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, let's just bring in our FBX real quick. Import FBX. Oh boy, why doesn't it showcase? Where is that at? Hold on a second. I think Blender doesn't want to show me my drive. And I can't remember how to get it to force to see my drive. There it is. Okay, so I started Blender after I had input in my drive. All right, so World Creator, Live, Exports, Blender, Test 2, Mesh, Import. I'm holding. Holding for Tyler. All right, so the terrain is in, but if I were to select the item, you can see the size is really, really, really tiny. It's super tiny, and I should have applied a scaler, but that's okay. Fun fact, I did this on purpose just so that you can see me transform this terrain into magicness. All right, so we're going to change the dimensions here. I'm going to change it to, now how do we know how big the terrain is? Well, in here, even though this is a 4K terrain in resolution, it's actually just 1024 by 1024 meters in physical landscape size because precision is every quarter meter. So we're going to just change this dimensions to 1024 and 1024. And I've got my X and Y mixed up. So hold on a second. Get out of here, Mellow Rights. All right, so here's the terrain. I'm going to right click, set origin, geometry to origin. And obviously my view distance is reset. There we go. All right, so here is the terrain. And this mesh, you can see, I'm going to drop this. Going to go to edit mode. You can see here is all of the mesh, but every vertice, there should be 512 by 512. So this is a really low density mesh. But I'm going to go back to this item. And now, how do we know how tall this is? We have the X and Y, which really I should have had these reversed. But Y right now is vertical. But it shouldn't be. But here, we know by clicking the GPU info here, we have the sort of terrain min and max height. So the terrain min is 3 meters and the terrain max is 125 meters. So doing some math, the total terrain height is 122 meters. So in here, if you're really wanting it to be precise, change the vertical axis to 122 meters. You can change it however you want, but if we want to match World Creator, we have this now matching World Creator. All right, whoops. All right, so remember I had talked about the sort of little sharp edges. Well, you see how these sharp edges are just a little sharp right there. Oops, my bad. If we were to click on the terrain, then go to the modifier tab, add a modifier, and do smooth corrective If I were to zoom in a little bit. All right, so we can do the scale. Let's say the scale is 0.5. Ooh, how about 0.3? See how it's smoothed the edges? Because the scale is going to factor in a smaller amount. This is basically, this corrective smooth is basically the same thing as the denoise filter in World Creator, but this one is a little bit more, not trying to bash World Creator, it's a little bit more sophisticated. All right, so we have this now to kind of get rid of this little grid edging here. Right click, shade smooth. And it's shaded smooth a little bit, but it's still, that resolution is weird. What we want to do now is let's drag up a new window, go here, hit shader editor. All right, so now, since with the landscape selected, I'm in the shader editor and I could change the base color to whatever, as long as I am in texture mode. But I'd rather it just be that color. Now this is going to look weird. How about we change it to it's a little hard to see, that's for sure, especially with it being completely white. But remember, we imported this mesh as a 512 by 512 mesh. But we have this 4K normal map. I'm going to drag this 4K normal map into the shader editor here. And you can see I have this normal map here. I'm going to drag this normal map over into the color input channel. And look at there. See that detail that just added to the terrain? Let me lower this. Look at this detail. It's a low poly terrain, but this detail that we've added, and I'm sorry I'm jumping around, is a 4K normal map. And if you wanted to add even more detail, you just import a higher normal map. So this is the trick, the same trick that everybody uses in games or cinematography. They'll just use low poly meshes and high resolution normal maps. So if I undo this, before and after, pretty simple. And it's going to be the same process whenever we do some pieces later. But that is essentially what it is. And just because we exported a color map, we're going to input the color to base color. And here is that terrain inside Blender. Now, obviously, this is a bit shiny. Well, it's not in rendered view yet. Hold on a second. Let me go to Eevee. Where's my render tab? Cycles. And we're going to change the light to sun. That's really strong. Dang, that's really strong sun. How many samples? Oh, I'm doing way too many samples. Hold on a second. We'll just do 500 or 200 samples just to get it to stop. Since cycles this probably is making Twitch go berserk. Let's half that light. All right, we'll let this render out its samples real quick. Oh, actually, that's still too much for the stream. Rendering is done. So this is essentially what it looks like. Obviously, it's really shiny, and we can go in the editor here and add more details, more variations to apply different masks for reflectivity, specularity, roughness, all those things. But I really just wanted to showcase how you could apply a normal map to a mesh in order to just increase its detail. And it's really efficient. It's not hurting the computer, even though I got a beefy GPU. It's basically free detail. And all video games and movies do the same thing. But in this case, I am just using it as a free resource. And you also don't have to use his color map. We could apply anything we want to this terrain, but we're going to do that in this very next example. So let's delete the terrain. And I can't freaking delete because I forgot my key bindings. And I am just going to, there we go. We've lost that. All right, so let's pull the shader editor down. All right, so that is method number 1. Method number 2 is we're going to create the terrain based on that displacement map, that EXR texture here. So what can we do? We're going to hit Shift A, and we're going to go to Mesh and a Plane. We could also do Grid if you want to skip some steps. Grid will let us go down here. I want this grid to be, let's see. We can have this grid if I zoom in here. I forgot the key binding for zooming into something real quick. So I'm just going to start completely from scratch so that we can have a complete understanding of everything. And that is not what I wanted to do. Shoot. Hold on a minute. I don't even want to have to go back through figuring that one out. Apologies, we're just having fun with this. All right, Shift A, plane. Shift A. If we set a grid, we can then decide how big we want that grid or how many subdivisions we want that grid. So I say 50 by 50, and I want that size to be 1024. So this grid, if I go to edit mode, is subdivided 50 by 50. And if we go and press in and select item, sorry, we need to be in object mode to see this. We can see that it is 1024 by 1024. So this is the same size as the terrain. Set render to GPU. It is now. The default render is EV. Oh, cycles. Did I? Yep. I forgot to do that. We're going to keep it at cycles. So cycles, GPU. I totally forgot that I had it on CPU, which is why it was taking a little longer to render on the mesh, which was really ridiculous of me. So thanks, Remix, for pointing that out. That was kind of dumb. All right, so if we did the grid, if you didn't do the grid and you just did the mesh, you can change the mesh of a single plane, but we only have one block here. It's not subdivided. If you want to subdivide it, go hit tab to go into edit mode, right click on the item, subdivide, and then we can subdivide it by 50 times here. It doesn't matter how many times you cut this. It could be 100 times, it could be 10 times, but the point is we need some mesh to be essentially cut up so that we could displace it. So we've got the terrain selected, and this particular terrain is 50 by 50 in its cuts. It's physically 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. So to add the displacement map, there's a couple ways, but the most non-destructive way is we're going to add a modifier. So go to the modifier properties, add modifier, and displace. Sounds pretty simple. So we're going to click new, and we've created a new texture. So let's just call this map disp. Now, in order to edit or to input our texture, we could either click this icon here, which will really just take us down to the texture tab. So go to the texture property tab. You can see we have the map displacement selected. Make sure it is an image from this list. So we've got image, and we're going to just open it from our file. So let me go through and find the file real quick. Live. So export, Splendor, test. And you can see that Heightmap 4K EXR. I'm going to click open. And you're probably wondering, well, what the heck is this? Well, first things first, you need to make sure that on the modifier, this coordinates is set to UV. So it will select all four corners to displace. If I were to increase the strength at 100, you can see it is now increased all of these bits. But that's not enough information. That's 50 by 50 subdivisions, or cuts in the terrain. We need to add more information or more splits of the terrain in order for this displacement map to have something to pass information to. Before we do that, on the texture for this here, where it says color space, just check this to non-color data, because we are essentially using a black and white texture map or grayscale map that is not having any other color information applied for the action that it's using. So go back to the modifier, displacement, and what we need to do is basically subdivide this into more vertices. So add a modifier, and then we'll go to subdivision surface. Now, it looks weird here, but we need to make sure that this subdivision is on top of the displacement. In this case, what is at the top gets applied first, and what's at the bottom will be applied last. It's in reverse in World Creator, or at least it is in this version. So if we were to increase our viewport, or levels of subdivisions on the viewport, and then make sure you're in simple, otherwise you'll get edges that are kind of weird, you see that it's starting to add that information back. Now it looks pretty blocky. Remember, we can shade smooth. Now the more variations you add, the more that displacement map will have mesh to displace. But this is sort of a pro and con thing, and we've got a little weird, that was a little weird export there. My last terrain didn't do that. I hate it when it does that, but we'll roll with it. Anyway, so the viewport here, or the levels under viewport, it's sort of a pro and con. The more that you apply, the more detail you have, obviously, but the more that you apply, the less performance you have. So what we could do is, again, we can use that normal map if we want to subdivide this, say, 5 times. We could go back to the shader editor, click on the terrain, and we don't have a texture for this terrain yet. Let me go to the texture tab. I'm going to start a new one. And then I'm going to Shift A, type in normal map here. And then I'm going to plug in that normal. Oh no, I think I just froze it. No, we didn't. Pardon me. There we go. Here it is. All right, so then we're going to take the color of our normal map back into here, and you can see it has applied that normal map straight to the terrain. But we're not going to do that necessarily, because I want to showcase how we use those splat maps. Now we can keep this here. That's okay. And I'm going to go, we'll stay in the colored version right here. And let's change the base color to something a little darker, just so that we can kind of see what we're doing, even though it's probably a bit too dark. That's fine. All right. So we have 3 splat maps here. We don't really need this one because it's solid white. So let's just go through, and I can't remember. Here we go. RGB nodes. So we'll do a few RGB nodes here. And we can take an RGB node, put it in the base color, and we can say we'll make this completely red. Well, I will make this next one green and this last one blue, just so that we can have a couple variations here. So how do we tell Blender to basically mask these out? Well, we're going to use these 3 textures. So I'm going to drag and drop this one in. I'm going to put it up here, and then I'm going to go in here. And if I do this converter, I think it's converter or color, mix RGB. I can do a mix RGB node, plug in the green color here into color number 2. And by changing this factor here, it is changing from green to red. But we have this little, if I zoom in, my apologies there. Let me just give it a little more something to look at. We have this factor here. And if we take the color of this, now this we need to change from color space to non-color data because it's a, grayscale map. We'll take the color output here, plug it into the factor, and in a few seconds, you'll see, look at there, we have masked in the area of where the green is going to be. And that is based off that slope. If you find yourself that you've swapped these and you're like, oh, I didn't like that, but I didn't want to be confused, you could just, add color ramp node. You could take this and invert the colors, and it's basically the same thing as if these were flip-flopped. The color ramp node actually gives you some control a little bit on that. Let me go this way on that factor sum, but it's not so much. You can see how it's affecting right here at this edge. If I were to see how it's tightening it up a little bit. If I were to darken this up, you see how it's removing some of that feathering effect. All right, we don't want that. And we will just go ahead and swap these back to what we want. So with this mix RGB node here, whatever is the second color, whatever is the color that is on top is the first color that's applied. The color that's on the bottom is the second color that's applied. And this, the factor of whatever's white, remember, if we go here on this texture, whatever is white will paint whatever is in the bottom here, or the bottom color slot. And we can keep doing that. So let's duplicate this. Let's say we want blue here. This time we'll take the output of this, put it into color, the output of this, put it into the base color. And then we will get the next one, Splatmap number 2. And we will feed the color in here, but we remember we need it to be non-color data. And we have now that same color here. We can do it one more time. We need to stretch our stuff out here. Splatmap number 3. This one, let's just make it purely white. Feed that into the bottom area. Set this to non-color data, color, factor. And there you have it. That is a bit much. That is way, way too much. So this is one of those examples where I would add the color ramp node for this one. and I could dial back the color some, or make the whole thing 50% gray. So a color ramp node is really good because it'll help you basically clamp the values of your splat map. But that's essentially, despite my little wings here, my last terrain that I had did not have those little wings, but I'm not going to worry about wasting time on clipping those. That is not what this guide is for. It's basically just showing you how we can go about masking in these textures. Now, obviously this doesn't look great. It looks like hot garbage, and the colors are really there just so that you can see the point of how to take a splat map from World Creator and import that into Blender and use it however you want. Now, this is the sort of, I would say, the absolute basic variant of this. What I would prefer us to do, and I'm going to do this now. So we're going to select all of this. We're going to just delete it. Now, what we could do is, let's say we want to have Megascans textures. Now, next week, as a little spoiler, we're going to also be in Blender and World Creator, but we're going to involve Megascans in it as well. And I'll show you how to apply actual textures to it. But we're going to get the point across in this sort of pipeline here in just a second. What about if we have this principled BSDF is everything that you have your entire node setup structure for a particular texture, like rocks. You know, say I do the input of whatever, imagine this is a texture. We can just say this is a base color texture of this little gray color, this little brown color here. Instead of worrying about what we did before with mixed RGB nodes, we're actually going to duplicate these. So imagine, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but I'm trying to get this organized here. Imagine each and every one of these each one of these principled BSD shaders is its own texture. We can actually merge all of those just like we did the individual colors with a mix shader node. So go to shader, and then we can mix that shader. So we're going to now add the top value to the top shader. This is just like the mix RGB node, except it's for entire shaders, which is really cool because we can mix a lot of things together. And then let's say we want the rocks on this one to be a little bit gray. So now, the base color of the terrain and the rock color of the terrain, we're now going to add that very first splat map back in here. It's automatically non-color. Connect these, and now we've basically just combined two different shaders together for this exporting to the landscape. So this is the same exact thing as before. Let me actually make... Yeah, I don't like that so much. There we go. And we'll make the rocks a little brighter. So this is the same exact thing, same thing as using the mix RGB node, except we're again combining shaders. And that's important because each one of our textures is going to have a different sort of properties. It's going to have different roughness values, different metallic properties. It's going to have its own normal map, and we can merge all of those normal maps into one particular texture. So let's keep adding this on. Sorry, we will Shift D and Shift D. So we will stack these. Through the whole process. Take that here. And take this one here. We're going to apply that bottom one there. And we're going, it's really hard to see. There. And this one, the watercolor, we will keep somewhere around this light gray color. Green, we liked that green before. We can make it a little bit dark or a little bright. So now we'll do this. And then we'll just go through the process of adding the Splatmaps back again. To that one and to this one. And it looks pretty much the same way we had it, except again, we had to change this color ramp node is just a little too tight. And I believe we didn't have it white. We had it more of that sort of, yeah, there we go, that color. So imagine each one of these colors now is a texture instead of a RGB color. We've basically and I really hate that you can't see this, so I apologize about the size of this. So imagine each one of these principled shaders has its own normal, its own textures applied to it, and we're mixing all of these shaders together and distributing those based on these splat maps, all with these mixed shader nodes, and we're outputting that all as one. Now, the one thing that I don't like about this particular method is that it kind of ruins our normal map for the entire terrain, but I would say it's sort of a hit or miss on what you want to do, because you're going to have the normal information from all of the textures to give you details. And at this point, you don't really need the normal for the entire terrain. But if you really want it, because I haven't quite, if anybody has a better idea on how to apply a normal to the entire terrain without adding color to it, let me know, because it's sort of a little weird. Like, of course I could add another BSDF shader, do one final mix node here, and then I could add the normal map. Whoops. I could add this. And then I can merge these together. But the problem with taking this and merging them together is you have to choose a factor. But, then you have the option of add shader, which will literally just add these two together on top of each other. But the problem that I have is I want all of this other information, the specular, the base color in particular, to not be affected. I really just want to take a principled BSDF shader, break its attributes just like you can in Unreal, and export and merge only the normal map with the other shaders. You can't really do that in this case, or at least I haven't figured out a way how to do that. And it's really annoying, but you can, in a way, add a displacement texture. You can add this normal map in here. And let's say the scale, let's turn it to 0 and make, I can't remember exactly how. Let's see, we'll take this one, the mid-level, at 0 and make this one 0.5 just to see what we can do. And you can export this displacement into this displacement map for the output, and it will add the normal maps. It's hard to see here. It will add that normal map information. But the problem, let me see. The problem is that essentially, I can't remember if, no. The problem is that this displacement will physically alter the mesh, and the whole point of a normal map is that it's not physically altering the mesh. So it's not really the pipeline that I want to go about doing it. So I'd rather have no normal map there and just have the normal map from the textures do all the handiwork, if that makes sense. So I know that was a lot, and we're a little over our normal time is at 1 hour and 15 minutes, but do you guys have any questions about everything that I had just rushed through? Again, like I said, we're going to go through next week on importing with this particular terrain. We'll go ahead and import Megascans textures. And what we'll do is for each, instead of having each Megascans texture populate this graph and make it really ugly, we'll select these nodes, right click and create a group. And then we'll just, within this group, this node group, we will do all of the texturing for a specific texture. And we'll go back to the main material. Well, I done goofed. We'll go back to the main material. And here we go. See here, this all of this node structure is being dropped into this node group right here. So instead of this one node group would just be a texture, a texture, a texture, a texture, so that we can kind of have a cleaned up graph. Oh, you could add a mix shader and put it to add or overlay and have both normal maps, I think. So why ungroup? There we go. That is true, but the problem is for this, we did that before. So let's just, for as an example, if we, this is just a version, if we wanted to set up a material for, or set up a shader for each material and mix the shaders together, instead of, that's sort of the caveat. If you want one single principal DF shader, then you just have to apply groups in textures, and which might be the simplest way to do it. And then yes, you can do the mixed RGB node to mix all of the exported normals to one single shader, but you can't mix a normal, like you can't do wherever it's at. I always forget where the heck it's at. Yeah, you can't do a mixed RGB node right here because see, it's red. It won't allow you. It'd be nice because I would love this option right here for the mix shader, or at least the mix shader to be a little bit more intelligent, or just the shaders to be a little bit more intelligent. But yes, so we could actually set up a graph for two ways. We'll do it with the principled, with each material having its own shader group, or another material where there's one single principled BSDF shader and all the materials are just in their own groups, and we could use that, now I've done lost it again. Color, I know it's mixed RGB. We could use the mixed RGB node to mix all of the normals together. So I guess that would be the pipeline that we can go about doing it. Because you can mix normals together, and I think you can use the mixed RGB for that, since it's exporting a color. Yeah, since it's exporting a color, we could have multiple ones together for sure. So yeah, that would be probably the best way to do it. But I was just trying to come up with a way to have a principled shader per material, but we may need to just do one single principled shader and group all the materials. It's about saving graph aesthetics. So we'll probably do that next time. So I hope that made sense to everybody. This was kind of a quick flash run through. I hope it made sense to understand how to export splat maps from World Creator and utilize them in Blender. It's sort of the same process in a way in Unreal Engine, which we'll do that in a couple weeks, I think. So if there's any further questions, I'll let it stay open for just a little bit. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to our next stream. And so that I can make sure, I will save this out so that we can continue this next week, where we apply Megascan's materials, or maybe we may see what Megascan's materials we can use, but we may do it for RD textures instead. Save that blend file. Or simply duplicate another BSDF and only add the normal map from World Creator on that one. Actually, so that's what I did. The only problem with that, which would be ideal if we could do this. Oops. It'd be ideal if we could do this, but the problem with that is no, not a mix. The problem with that is here is sort of this. I didn't mean to do that. So there's two things. It's basically, I want to be able to turn off this base color. See, it's the mix is still 50-50. So if I go one way, it's going to just do everything that's here on the left. I do one way, it's going to just do whatever's right here. You can see that normal map is right there. 50-50 would be fine, but I don't know how to turn off the base color. Don't forget about no color data. For the normal, I did that too. I've set the base color to black, but it's still, see, this factor is what it should look like. Setting it to black still darkens it up. Now that's okay, I guess, but it still is weird. And I can't add this earlier in the line because these are cutting it out. The only way that I remember how to do this is to take the normal map and apply it to each one of the shaders, which is kind of dumb. But I always thought that the normal map, because it was color data, should be sRGB and not non-color data. It's been a while since I've dove into a whole lot of Blender, but yeah, wish Blender had better ways for this kind of, yes. So we're going to fix it next stream. I think the best way is just to add all, I'm going to work out a way to add all the materials to groups and export those out. And I believe grouping would work and just do it all from a single principled shader. But it would be nice if the principled shader here allowed you to break its attributes and only export what you wanted. Like there's no, I guess we can make our own, figure out a way to make our own shader, but I don't know of a shader that would work where you're just doing, or if there was like a node that you could plug into something that says it just doesn't exist. Like I would like to be able to click this shader or right click this piece and then like have an option to turn off the base color or turn off specularity or turn off roughness. I tried on Blender Octane version and it's a bit limited. Oh, you have the Octane. Wait, I have the Octane version of Blender too, but I thought Octane's, I haven't actually dove into it as much as I really wanted to, but I would have assumed that Octane's shader was a bit more sophisticated than this shader. So anyway, we are well over my time. I am going to head out. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm going to be again live next Monday, same time, same channel. And we will continue this where we'll just have some fun adding some actual materials to this and maybe add another landscape to this because I have another landscape that I tested that would be, it's not in there. Well, I had another landscape that I really wanted to add to this and test out. So anyways, thank you guys so much and I'll see you next time.